Simpson here at Quant Minds International in London. Joining me now is Alisa Rusanoff, Head of Credit and Technology at Crescendo Asset Management. Thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you for having me. Pleasure.
And you're discussing the power of alternative data in finance on your panel. What are the most promising sources and uses of alternative data that you've come across?
So my focus is private credit in the US and abroad. I finance asset-based lending transactions, trade finance, cross-border trade, and other types of transactions that could be a little bit esoteric. So I do deal a lot with different sets of data and pools of data in terms of analyzing them, synchronizing the data, making sure reconciliation of the data makes sense as well. So it's part of what I do. Alternative data is super important for private credit specifically because there's not a lot of data available out there in the United States. So you have to be a little bit creative and tap into, shipping information and customs information, making sure you're assessing various types of risks. In addition to credit, you assess fraud risk, you assess operational risk. You want to make sure the business is performing and you're financing, a good, healthy, sound business.
So it's a really broad brush approach.
Absolutely, including geopolitics, including macro risks. I think I do believe in a complex approach into underwriting generally.
And what are some innovative models or strategies that are being used to improve the decision-making process and subsequently generate alpha?
So private credit does have alpha in terms of, the yield that it's bringing its investors. So that's why there's a lot of investors, and you're probably seeing that in the news, funds and wealth managers are raising a lot of money, hundreds of millions of dollars into the strategy because it attracts investors. What I do think is Gen AI specifically, Gen AI, and the tools and capabilities that those tools are bringing are creating a more efficient market in private credit, which basically means the borrowers or the businesses that we're investing in on the debt side, they would be having access to cheaper cost of capital, which obviously would be a boost to their productivity, to their unit economics, and that would be a much more efficient market the way we'll see it in a few years, if not longer. So it's an exciting time, and I think if you build the right technology, I think it's super important to be on top of the curve as opposed to go out of business because you're just non-competitive from a cost of capital standpoint.
And how do you go about addressing regulatory concerns or ethical considerations when using alternative data?
It depends how you use it, right? If you have, black box problem and all of your data or some of your data is not explainable or there's no transparency, of course, it creates a regulatory issue. It creates an issue for investors. I cannot explain why I would invest in a deal. Meanwhile, a lot of what I'm, building is based on rules, right? So there's a lot of document verification, there's a lot of data synchronization, there's a lot of tools that are assisting you in making a decision. But so far, I can say that from a credit decision standpoint, it's enhancing that process as opposed to fully replacing a human being. So if you want to look at that, I would even say it's almost like a live assistant in terms of, Gen AI, in terms of data analysis, as opposed to, hey, I don't know what's going on there, let's just, do this deal. We're not doing that, and I don't think that's ethical.
And do you see a future where what we consider alternative data today will become just thought of as data? And what change do you think needs to happen for that to become reality?
It's a great question. I think the border is very gray these days. For example, climate risk data, even a few years ago used to be a very much alternative source, right? And not a lot of investors would be requiring or requesting to have that data as part of your package. Meanwhile, nowadays, it's, something you can find on Bloomberg Terminal, or you can find, carbon emission quantitative analysis. So that's probably become data as, more kind of conservative way of looking at it. And I think the same will happen to a lot of other sources. And we're talking about commerce data, we're talking about retail data, we're talking about, population growth, migration, macro data. I'm sure with Gen AI, even macro and geopolitical data would become part of our kind of normal processes, as opposed to looking at it as a black swan, event, which is almost impossible to predict in terms of what's going to happen. But I think understanding little details of underwriting and analysis in terms of if that happens, what consequences could that lead to, I think that's becoming normal these days. I think that's certainly coming very, very soon.
Alisa Rusanoff, thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you so much.